Alright guys, so let's look into the setup here. So let's get started here. The very important things to understand here is, as part of the prerequisite for this hands-on, we will use Docker, the GitHub, Elastic Container Service, and ECR, the Elastic Container Registry services for this particular workshop. We need to have an AWS account, and interestingly, everything we do as part of this workshop will be covered under AWS free tier. So that's really nice. So you also need to have Docker. So you need to install Docker. You need to configure CLI. You could also have a editor, and you can also use an IDE. Now here, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, but it really depends. So whatever the IDE you would want to use, you can go about doing that if you want to follow along. All right, so a couple of things I'll have a check into. So maybe first thing first, I'm going to look into the version for my AWS, and it will basically let me know because I've already set up the CLI. Okay, I have also set up the Docker, and I'm going to look into the Docker version here. So you can do an AWS version, a Docker version, and just to cross check that you have everything configured, set up, and installed there. So I have everything done here. I've also have the the Git configured here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to the most important thing would be required to configure and set up the repository there. So what I'm going to do is I have the link for the repository there. So what I would do is, first thing, I'm going to go ahead and make a directory here. So I'm going to do an mkdir, and I'm going to create a directory which is for AWS microservices demo. Right. So I'm going to create a directory. I'm going to get into this directory here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the command which is going to be git clone, and I'm going to paste the link there for the repository. I'm going to clone the link there, the repository. Okay. So once it is done, I can actually look into the content, and I'm going to get into the directory, which is going to be Amazon ECS Node.js microservices application, and I'm going to look into the directory structure there. So all looks fine here. The next thing is where I'm going to use my Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to get into Visual Studio Code. I'm going to open the repository here. Now this will basically give you a little bit of more clarity on the so meaning the the code files, the application files, and the structure there. And I'm gonna select the folder. I'm gonna open this up. I would say yes, I trust the authors there. And interesting thing to look into here would be once we have downloaded the repository and all, and we are trying to open it in a project here is you have your infrastructure and services folder there. So maybe under containerize you're going to have infrastructure and services folder. Now here, if you look into the ECS YAML there, and this basically defines the application there, and and this basically gives you a CloudFormation template there. So the infrastructure holds the AWS CloudFormation infrastructure configuration code, which you're going to be using it in the next step and all. So we will look into that. And services basically contains the code that basically forms the Node.js application there. So that is what it looks like. The that it has Docker file, the packages.json, rule.server. It has deploy.json, which has the entire code here and whatnot. You also have the microservices, which is the next step. So this is going to be something which is monolithic, which is containerized in 2 containerized folder there, and then the next folder where we have the microservices. It has the similar structure, which is for infrastructure, which has this CloudFormation for ECS YAML, but under services it has now these services broken into microservices, post threads, and uses individual services there. Anyways, we will look into that and get into more details of it as we make a progress there. Just a brief overview of how the code looks like. So I have just opened up the code into the code editor there, and also downloaded the code and cloned it into my local Git. Okay, so once we have done that, we are all set in terms of doing some of the prerequisites and also downloading the source code and opening up the project. And I'm using Visual Studio Code here, as I said that. Now what we have to do next is going to be configure a repository there. Now for that, what we're going to do is we're going to get into ECR, which is going to be Elastic Container Registry there. And what I have to do is we're going to create a repository. Now this is going to be a private repository. The name of the repository is going to be API, and I will leave rest of the settings as is. You could also, if you look carefully, will realize that the UI for the repository looks like the account number, then the regional, which is where you are actually going ahead and creating this repository. I'm into Ohio region, which is going to be US East 2, and then the name of your repository altogether. So that's going to be very basic. I will go ahead and create this repository. It has been created, and that's what the URI looks like, as I said that. So now what you would do is, once you have created the repository, what we do is we will see the confirmation message as successfully created the API, and it also shows the repository address in this format, as I said that, whatever. And now you can also look into the different commands. First is to retrieve and authenticate token and authenticate your Docker client to the registry there. So once we have done this, the next step is how we would use this authentication token to authorize ourselves to connect to the ECR there. So the next step is all about how to use a terminal to authenticate Docker login. So what we're gonna do is we have this credentials here. We're gonna copy that, and what we're gonna do is we have already have the API which has been configured for our code altogether. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get into the location. Now the location is gonna be CD, and we have so we have the so directory which we have created, which is going to be AWS Microservices demo, and inside there is where we're going to get into 2 hyphen okay, let me get inside that. I'm going to look into directory here. We have Amazon Node.js Microservices, and here we're going to get into 2 hyphen containerized folder there. We will get into services, and inside where is we're going to get into API. Okay, now what we're going to do is we'll try to connect to the repository here, and I've already copied the connection string there, which is where we are going to use AWS ECR, which we have already configured the CLI there, and we're going to get into login password. We're going to define the region, and then with the standard username and password we'll try to connect to the repository. Let's have a look into that. Once it is connected, it's going to give a successful message of login succeeded. So that looks fine. So we have done with this. So we have successfully logged in and connected. Now what we're going to do is once we we are authenticated and successful, we're going to build the image. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna run docker build and we're gonna say -t and we're gonna build the API. All right. So we're building the image there, and this is basically using the Docker file which we have defined in the same location. That's the reason I've given a dot at the end of it. So this completed, and this is nice. So now once the build is completed, we will try to tag the image so that you can push it to the repository and all. So in order to tag the image there, what we're going to be going ahead and doing is we will run a docker tag command, and that is what we will use to do the tagging there. I think what I will try to do is get into this and see if I can actually get the command here, which is also available. You see, this is something similar what I've done, and I can actually, after the build completes, I can tag image so that I can push it to the repository. So I'm going to use this particular command here, and we are tagging it with the latest one. So API colon latest. So let me go ahead and run this up, and once it is tagged here, so now once we have done the tagging and all, what we can do is we can finally push the image to the ECR, and which is running a docker push command and all. We can also go ahead and do docker images to see the images. So I have some of the previous images which I have been working on, but yeah, I have very interestingly, what I'm going to do is first is I'm going to go ahead and so I have these similar, because I've been working on it. You could see that some of the images and some of the other stuff I've been working on. So what I'm going to do is I would try to maybe remove the images and maybe try to rerun or create the image again there, and then I would try to tag it up. So what I would do is in order to do that very quickly, I'm gonna delete the images. So for that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do docker image rm, and I'm gonna remove the image, so I can actually pick up the image IDs there and try to delete the images there. So basically I'm only going to do it for the APIs there, so that we have no confusion at whatsoever. So I would pick up the images one by one. So this is something which is already have a reference there. So let me actually try to force this. So I will use the force flag here. So this looks fine. So let me do it for the okay. So let me actually have a look into checking the images here again. So this looks fine there. So I have other images which I really don't care and worry about, but I would want to maybe build the images from the scratch there. So what I have done is I would want to copy this and I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna build an image there again. So once it is done, I'm gonna go ahead and tag this particular image there. So I've done that. Once I've done the tagging, I would try to push this image. So I'm gonna push the image there. Alright, so this is something which is going to push the image, and it shouldn't take much time there. Docker push is a command to push the repository. Once it is pushed, we're gonna look into the repository in the ECR, and we're gonna look into our image there. Alright, so once it is done, we will go back to the repository. We're going to close this, and I'm going to look into private repositories. In fact, I'm going to get into my repository here. I'm going to get into yeah, so this is where I have the latest one, a latest image there. So that's what is just now being pushed, and everything looks fine here. All right, so this is nice and interesting. Let's actually move on. So it's wonderful that we have done the very first part of this entire workshop, which is to containerize the monolithic. So now what we're going to do is, in the next step, we're going to deploy the monolithic. Thank you.